So this question basically comes down to, should you have guests or should you do a solo podcast? You already know the answer. It depends. Let me explain. So if you're going to have guests on your podcast, this works really well if the purpose of your podcast is that you want to show your brand is part of the ecosphere of the society that you're in, that you're listening, that you understand the wants and needs of your customers, of your stakeholders, of those who have interest in what you do, that you're not just there to tell your story, you're there to be a part of the story that is society's overall fabric. All that sounds kind of hallmarky and wonderful, but it's a great reason to have a podcast. So an interview is a perfect way to illustrate that, have an interview-based podcast. It's also valuable to have a solo podcast if what you're trying to do is have people hire you for your coaching sessions, hire you as a coach, to hire you for your services, except maybe a podcast isn't the perfect fit for that. It's that kind of call to action is difficult in a podcast. It's better to pull them to your community, like your workshops, or to sign up for your academy, for your master classes, things like that. If that's the call to action or the purpose of your podcast, then a solo podcast is a really valuable way to do that. I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with where that is the goal of their podcast. They ultimately want to be hired by their listeners in some way, shape, or form, but they've chosen to go with an interview style podcast, probably because it's the kind of podcast they've imagined or because that's what they listen to. And they'll say to me at a certain point in time, well, the podcast, it's doing really well, but I haven't been hired yet. Well, no kidding. You're spending all your time in your podcast illustrating the knowledge that others have. You're providing the stage upon which other experts demonstrate their abilities. And again, that's really valuable to do if what you're trying to show is that your brand is listening, that your brand is part of that society. That's a very good approach. But if you're trying to straight up be hired, a solo podcast probably gives you the best opportunity to do that. You can also have co-hosted. So you can have co-hosted solo where it's two of you and you're going back and forth, and it's great if one says red and the other says blue. You could also have co-hosted with guests. The challenge with a co-hosted podcast, and it's not to dissuade you from doing it, is usually it's two people who get along fantastic in person. Maybe as professional colleagues, maybe they've spent a lot of time together, they grew up together, they go to the pub all the time together, whatever the circumstance is. But more often than not, once this microphone is in front of them, it really creates a different theater. It creates a different feel to it. And often one is more comfortable with the idea than the other, at least to start. And that creates kind of an awkward split between them as well. Co-hosting is much more difficult than you might think. And if you're co-hosting with guests, the challenge is driving the interview from a logical point A to point B to point C to point D, because you'll often flip back and forth. You ask a question, then you ask a question, and kind of play tennis like that. And really no one's in the driver's seat that way. Sometimes the guest, if they're particularly skilled, is in the driver's seat. You could also have narrative-based podcasts. My favorite, Hidden Brain, with Shankar Vedantam, that follows a narrative where there are interviews, but you don't really hear him going back and forth with the guests. He's saying, and then what Wilbur told me was he regretted that day in Tuesday, something like that. And then you hear the clip from Wilbur, and Shankar does a great job with that. You could also have a roundtable podcast where there's a group of you, say as many as 6 or 7, and you're exchanging ideas. Again, some great ideas, but the hard part to the round table is it's hard to drive toward just one common theme. There was a study that was done by Pew Research looking at exactly this question. Do most successful podcasts have interviews or no interviews? And the headline that came out was, most successful podcasts have interviews on their podcasts. So that's the way to go. Problem is, once you dig into the stats, that's not exactly what the stats were showing you. So these are the numbers. 5% of the more successful podcasts always have interviews. 22% said they regularly have interviews. And from a follow-up question that I asked Pew Research, that means at least once every 3 months. 49% said they occasionally have interviews, now and again. And 24% said they never have interviews. So sure, you can divide the pie chart here to say, well, 76% of the more successful podcasts have interviews. And that's apparently what the headline writer was writing. And most people who posted this on social media, that's all they ever read. But another way to look at this pie chart is 95% said, well, no, not as a rule, we don't have interviews. So bottom line, don't let people cajole you into definitely having interviews on your podcast. I think they're a great idea. I have them on mine because my purpose is, again, to illustrate that my brand understands what's going on in society, that we're part of the conversation. But if your purpose is different from that, if it's to illustrate that you have a very high level of knowledge, then think about a solo podcast. And don't be afraid of this, well, I don't know everything there is to know about this. Nobody knows everything there is to know about your topic. The whole point is, do you have sufficient knowledge to say you have expertise? Thanks for watching. Please hit that subscribe button. That means the world to us. We're trying to build this podcast channel. It's fairly new. Enjoy your day and happy podcasting.